It's an honor for us to have you here. I watch his conference on YouTube and I enjoy so much. I'm pretty sure you will enjoy as well. Uh, but at some point, I also realized how bad financial decisions I have made. So it's okay if you feel bad as well. So please go ahead and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me here. So I was talking to Augustine and Adam, and what should I present? I can come and present a paper, or I can give you a broad overview of something that I've been lately pushing a field of study. Like household finance started maybe 20 years ago. I mean, I was like one of the earlier guys who was working on household finance. So now I've been thinking like we need a different way of thinking, a different area. So I'm pushing this idea of household sustainability. Okay. The reason I think of household sustainability. So by the way, these slides are a lot, 180 slides. I will not cover them. Typically, when I spend over these 180 slides, it takes me 9 hours to present them. So I go through in my class, I spend 9 hours to present to my PhD students. So I'll try to present them in 1 hour, only select of these slides. So I think of people thinking about sustainability, and most of the effort on sustainability has been top down. Basically, how do we get corporations to abide by some ESG standards and then get those corporations to be regulated and markets to actually make sure they're enforced and actually they keep their feet to the fire. My belief is that having this top-down approach to sustainability is just not feasible by itself unless we couple it with the bottom-up approach, which is that households need to participate in the effort to make the planet sustainable, which could be in different ways. I mean, until we get households to participate, we'll just not get there. So I think of having one. So before that, I also think of what is the definition of sustainability. Typically, when people think about sustainability, they mostly or exclusively focus on environmental sustainability. I really want to think about economic sustainability and social sustainability. So everything I will be talking about is from the household perspective. Households need to be environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable, and economically sustainable. And that's the only way we can actually think about sustainability as a success. Obviously, there has been efforts defining environmental, social, and environmental for a long time. Latest have been that there are 17 goals, 169 targets of sustainability. I am going to essentially boil these down, 17 goals, 100 into 3 places, which is environment, social, and economic. And the questions people can then study is, how should we think about this field? I am not a theorist, so I'm not going to even make an effort to try and think about defining a model which incorporates the social and environmental sustainability goals. I mean, basically, you can think about, we have this, a discounted utility function that we think about, but that is typically defined within a person, within a lifetime. Okay, that's how we think of this utility function. When I want to bring in environmental and social, I want to think of not within a lifetime, but multiple lifetimes. That's how I bring in the environmental part. And social is not within a person, but across a family or across a set of individuals that I want to maximize utility, not just for me. And if we think of that kind of utility function, then you can incorporate essentially the whole of sustainability that has environment, social, and economic. Other people who are better theorists can actually write this model down. It will not be very difficult model to write down as if you think about it the way just I defined. Okay. So I think understanding these 3 factors is really important. In environmental sustainability, I think of 3 things, essentially from a household perspective. Our household footprint is mainly for utilities, transportation, and food. And that essentially comprises of around 90% of our household footprint, environmental footprint. There are obviously stock of issues that we buy, like we buy a car, we buy a house. That also creates an environmental footprint, but those are stock that we kind of utilize over multiple years. But the flow of the environmental footprint we create is through utilities, electricity, water, gas that we use every day, transportation that we're using on a daily basis, and food that we are consuming regularly. So the efforts that I think about is how can we reduce our electricity or water consumption? We actually don't pay any attention to that. I mean, if you think about it, most of us sleep at around 20 degrees with our AC on and a comforter on top of that. It makes no sense. Most of us will take an elevator for one floor up. I remind constantly people when they do that, why are you doing that? And part of the reason is it's not their fault that an architect actually makes the elevator salient and the stairs non-salient. So we just end up taking things that are more salient to us. So if we kind of fix a lot of these issues, we can make ourselves much more environmentally sustainable on some of these things. Most of us eat food without thinking what we are eating. I'm guessing most of you in this room eat beef. Now the carbon footprint of beef is 20 times that of lentils or fish. Now we don't talk about it, are not educated about it, so we continue to eat beef. If we price the beef properly, most of the time we will stop eating beef and we will actually reduce the environmental footprint of the food that we eat. Similarly, think about in Singapore, it's a tiny island, okay? There are too many convertibles and too many SUVs. I have no idea where those SUVs are going. There are no mountains there. And I have no idea where those racing cars are going because there is essentially no highway. It's not Germany or US. So clearly the cars are way underpriced in Singapore for them to be, they're not priced for the environmental footprint those cars create. They're taxed high in Singapore, mainly to recover the cost and have some kind of a, luxury tax. But if we enforce a sustainability tax on them, most people will stop buying those cars because they don't need them anyway. I mean, there are no mountains to climb unless they bring it to Malaysia, and Singaporeans are very scared to bring their cars here. They can get robbed and stolen. Okay. So this is just environmental footprint of the individuals. If we think about the financial sustainability, most of us make financial decisions. I'll talk about it if I get time at the very end. We make many mistakes. Believe me, all of you in this room have made many financial mistakes. And if you tell me you have not, I will give you examples later. Okay, starting from the very basic on how we actually buy a house, most of us end up buying too much housing. If you look at the data, we end up buying one extra bedroom on average. When you buy extra bedroom in housing, you're indebted in your mortgage for your lifetime for paying for that extra bedroom. Then essentially you're compromising on your job options because you have to pay this higher mortgage. You're compromising in your consumption choices. And essentially that's a big mistake we make. Mortgage refinancing, most of us actually get mortgage refinancing wrong. We either refinance our mortgage too early or we refinance our mortgage too late, and we pay huge fees in terms of our mortgage refinancing. Consumption and savings decision. In stock market participation, I mean, most of you guys already heard about the stock market participation. We get that very thing incorrect. Okay. Social sustainability, I mean, that's the most understudied topic in the world because we don't even talk about gender wage gap, women's education, minimum wages to protect labor participation, aging and retirement, and there's so many topics on social sustainability. I think as soon as we talk about sustainability, we are stuck on environmental, and we just never leave that sphere. I want to bring these three topics and give them equal weight when we think about sustainability, social, environmental, and financial. The research topics I want to push forward are now just not purely financial or environmental, but trying to mix these things together. How can we look at changes in the environmental side and look at the effect of that on our financial behavior or social behavior, and vice versa, exploiting policy changes and so on and so forth. I'm going to give you a lot of examples to this effect, and let me come back to this slide at the very end, because ultimately, if we want to make an effort into building or solving the sustainability problem of households, we'll have to measure it. And we will have to first measure it. Let me just talk about it right now. So measuring is the biggest problem of sustainability. We do that very well on the financial side. We have a FICO score. Every one of us essentially in this room has a FICO score. So we know our financial sustainability. Our FICO score is very good. We are doing fairly well on our financial decision making. But we have no score on our environmental side. I would like to propose that we build an environmental scorecard for individuals. Now, it's a very simple problem to solve if we think about it. I told you our carbon footprint is on food, electricity, or utilities, and transportation. Most of the data sits in your financial transactions. Most of us buy petrol, buy MRT cards, pay for our utility bills, buy for our food and groceries using our e-wallets, credit cards, debit cards, or banking transactions. There are some who don't. Most of them are poor people, and for them it doesn't matter even if their footprint is anyway low. So if you don't capture them, I don't mind. Now, if I start capturing all of this data, I can start building a score for all of you in this room. Already many companies are doing that. I was making the same presentation at Alibaba. I was making this presentation in Singapore for commercial banks. I've been making this presentation in India, in the US, and a lot of effort. I'm working on this full-time at the center I run in Singapore, and many other private sector institutions are also building actively a scorecard on their for your carbon footprint.
So just to think about it in also some sense, it's kind of going towards thinking about very practical ways of looking at the world, right? So just to take the same example of you saying, let's say, looking at minimum wages or working conditions, right? You could think about hundreds of firms, multinationals, which have made immense commitments, say, since the Rana Plaza disaster. But, a lot of evidence still seems to suggest, real wages have grown in Bangladesh when the government stepped in and increased minimum wages. Similarly was the textile sector in China. So at some level, but if you go and look at these enterprises and their records now over a period of time, they will certainly look like, something has improved. But on the ground, I'm not so certain that so many important changes have really occurred, right? So this scorecard creation could just end up being, again, an activity which makes everybody feel good, but I'm not so sure how implementation is going to be.
Give me a few minutes.
Okay.
I've thought about it a lot. I've been thinking about it for 2 years. Clearly, I will answer your question. I will give you examples of actually minimum wage changes. I study that topic aggressively. I have 3 published papers on exactly minimum wage changes. So let me just finish on my thought on the scorecard. First is about building. Can we build it practically, feasibly? I think we can. There will be issues. It took us 10 years to actually build a FICO scorecard, which was reasonably good and usable. So I'll start now. If it takes 10 years, and there will be holes and loopholes, and people could misuse it initially, but we will fix it. Eventually, we will have a scorecard. If I do it, good. If I don't do it, somebody else will do it. So eventually, we will have a carbon scorecard for individuals. Now, why should we build it? How will we use it? Why should people want to give their data to me or to anybody to build a scorecard? I have 4 reasons. Right now, what is happening is within a country, the poor are cross-subsidizing the rich on the carbon footprint. The poor typically eat lentils and the rich typically eat beef. Rich drive Ferraris and poor take MRTs. We need to remove that inequality or cross-subsidization. Having this scorecard will help the poor. Okay? The second benefit I see is I want to work with the governments, and tax authorities can give a tax break for people who have a lower carbon scorecard. The third benefit I see is we actually talk a lot about green financing. Right now, banks do green financing to corporates based on the ESG score. Most of these ESG scores are garbage, and they are actually doing what you call it greenwashing. If we can build a consumer carbon scorecard, banks can start giving credit to consumers, green credit, which is lower mortgage rates, lower auto rates, lower other products. That actually helps the consumer because they have a green scorecard. And fourth, I think peer effects are huge in the world. We all like to brag about ourselves on what we do. I live in a green building. I drive a Prius, Toyota Prius, and I have a lower carbon footprint. We can then brag about our green scorecard and essentially get other people to behave like us. I don't eat beef. That's why my scorecard is low. Maybe you should try it, and your scorecard will be low. So I can see many ways I can actually use this scorecard, and consumers are willing to use it and provide their data, and it will be beneficial. So I think this is feasible, doable, and useful. I'm not going to talk about the social scorecard because that's controversial. Most people don't like my social scorecard. So I'll skip that slide and move on to talking about how do we then try to get there. Okay. these are just a bunch of studies I have done over the years. And I'll talk more about the environmental ones that I've been doing recently. I'm doing social studies, a lot of social studies in terms of gender wage gap, gender education gap, and then come back to even financial studies. Okay. So when we think about environmental issues, so I've been saying, look, I want us to reduce our carbon footprint. Let me start in a few places. Let's start with electricity consumption and water consumption. How do we get there? If I'm going to build a scorecard and then use the scorecard to lower your scores, how do I do that? Now, typically, as an economist, I think, look, if we do pricing, that should fix a problem. We can do behavioral interventions like nudging, interactions, or we can do more things which are more direct, which is actually social engineering, or we can do, essentially engineering where I should just fix the plumbing, and that will reduce your footprint. So I'm going to look at these things and show how they work. So here is an example of a project I did in Singapore, where we were trying to nudge children to get their parents to reduce their electricity bill. The project was called Project Carbon Zero, and we worked with the government in kind of issuing this. So what we did is we went to schools, a bunch of random schools in Singapore, and the schools said to the children, these are small kids, that look, if you can get your parents to reduce your electricity bill every month by 10%, you will be eligible to win an iPad. You will not win one, you will be eligible in a lottery to win one, okay? So then your name just goes into it, but you have to get your parents to reduce the bill by 10%. So first we collected their bill to get a baseline for 4 months, their electricity bill. Then we implemented this program where the kids brought the bill and wanted to see if they reduced by 10% or no. And then one of those kids won a prize. And then we stopped the program after 4 months and said, what do these parents do and the kids do in terms of electricity bill? Yeah. So in Singapore, it's easy to do because we know which children go to which school because they have this definition of the kid has to go within a school within 2 kilometers of that, if they live within 2 kilometers of the school. So here is a basic result. The first 4 months on this graph essentially shows you what is happening to the electricity consumption to kids who live near the treated schools, where we actually did this program, versus kids who live near control schools, where we did not have this program. So you can see these graphs are fairly similar to each other, the lines. Then in the next 4 months is where we actually implemented this. So red is the treated schools, and you can see the red line actually is going down after the first and second months. So essentially the electricity consumption is going down. Now, I really don't care about the kids who reduce by 10% because there'll be very few of them, okay? What I want to do is really get the free outcome from this. Because a kid who tells their parents to reduce their electricity by 2%, 3% because they want to get to 10%, but they can never get, for them, they're not even eligible for an iPad. I actually essentially got electricity reduction in Singapore for free without even giving them an iPad. So here you can see the kids actually within these buildings got to reduce their electricity consumption by on average 2.5 to 3%, okay? That is huge. That is within a building, on average, every kid is getting their parents to reduce their electricity consumption by 3%, okay? This is between month 4 and 8. When we stop the program, you can still see there is a gap between these two lines. So even after that, the kids are still pushing their parents. My point is we can do very simple things in life to get to reduce electricity. We don't do that enough. And most of this electricity reduction we found was coming from air conditioning. So because air conditioning is 40% of our electric bill in most households.
And did you ever go back now after 12 months were over to see whether any kind of effects persist?
So we did this thing in a different setting. Just recently, I could present those slides as well, where we actually said, let's put up banners in the common areas in these HDB buildings, where we actually give them information. So here, there is a prize money associated. There we actually said, we are just giving you information treatment. That look, if you actually reduce your electricity in this area, you can actually buy a chicken rice every 3 months for free because that's how much electricity is costing you. And we realized we randomly put these banners in various eating places near HDB buildings and other places we didn't put down. And then we measured electricity, very similar to this experiment We recently published that in Energy Economics, and we find very similar effects. There's a reduction of electricity of around 2%. So we worked again with the government in setting up those banners. They were pretty visible. The whole point was make it salient and make it important for the value for the pedestrians. Yeah.
So I also got that. So the reason why the blue line follows the treatment group is, I mean, the trend is similar is because just like seasonal. Okay, okay.
That's pure seasonal.
It's not because if I know that the parents of the, okay.
This is purely seasonal.
Oh, seasonal.
Yes. So we didn't remove any seasonality in the data.
Okay.
Let me talk about water. So water obviously is a big problem around the world. Singapore especially, it's an island nation. I mean, Singaporeans consume a lot of water. To give you a sense, Singaporeans on average consume around 160 liters per person per day. Singapore wants to reduce that water consumption to around 130 liters per person per day. And the question is, how do we get there? It's not easy. We can think about supply side solution. Most supply side solutions involve engineers. Since I'm not an engineer, I'm going to not think about supply side solutions. I'm going to think about demand side solutions. And demand side solution, the easiest solution is to say price. So Singapore actually changed the pricing 2 times. They increased the pricing on average by 30% if you have low water usage and by around 45% if you have high water usage. Okay. And the question is, does pricing increase reduce water consumption? Most people will say it will, and it is obvious. First, we need to get a point estimate. And second, there could be rebound effects and who knows. And so we wanted to test this in the data. So we actually collected the data for every household in Singapore. So we have the monthly water bill for every single apartment in Singapore for 10 years. Now, this is a big data exercise. So we are actually looking at, this is just the raw data of water consumption over a 10-year period per household broken down by the apartment unit size. If you're a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, and so on and so forth. Then what I did is I ran some simple regressions around the announcement of water change when the policy was announced versus when the policy was actually implemented. What you see is just the announcement itself got water reduction of around 5.8%. If I break that down by announcement versus implementation of this policy, there's still an announcement effect of 3.7%, whereas there's an implementation effect of 2.1% and 2.8% subsequently. Now, the point is, why is there an announcement effect? That is, most of us will say, look, they didn't even change the water price yet. The water price didn't go up, and you already are actually reducing the water usage. So typically, you can rely on rational inattention arguments that people are rationally inattentive. So they will only behave or change their behavior as soon as they find out that something is going on. So this was very salient to them that prices will go up by 30 to 45%. And so they right away acted on it and they reduced their water consumption. They didn't wait for the implementation of the policy. Some people obviously are not that attentive. When the prices went up, they actually reduced their water consumption. So you can see here the behavioral argument is that you can actually get effects purely on announcement itself. This was a fairly good study to show how we can reduce water. The next thing we said is, can we actually change plumbing? Now, plumbing is hard, it's costly. So Singapore has this very nice policy that if 80% of the residents of a given apartment building agree, then the government will come in and change the entire plumbing for the building and the electric wires. So we wanted to see if the people who opt in versus people who only vote, 79% of the people vote in that building, don't get the plumbing change, what is the water usage between those two buildings? So it's a very nice setting to kind of think about it. So here we are doing very simple staggered difference and difference kind of estimates. You can see the regression results that before the treatment, the control and treated group had very similar usage of water, and they are flat. But right after you get the plumbing changed because of this policy, which means 80% or more of the people in your building voted for it, then you see a water reduction on average per household in the building to be around 3.5%. Now that's huge. Now, if I take the pricing policy and this plumbing policy, That gets me a reduction of 7 to 8% in a building. The objective of Singapore government was to reduce by 10%. I have already gotten 2/3 of the way only by 2 policies. I don't have a third policy. Actually, we are writing that paper. If I show you the results, I'll show you we can essentially achieve all the water reduction we need in Singapore purely on that. Now, this is not a Singapore specific idea. I can replicate this anywhere in the world, including Malaysia, and we will see effects. And water is a very important resource for every country. Yes.
And just a small clarification, these are in P plus 10 is months or is that years? Years.
So the point here is that the effect of this policy will last you forever. Even 10 years later, you see people's water consumption does not go up. Now, that's very hard to achieve most of the time. You might say, oh, this is plumbing. So obviously, this is mechanical. But you know, most of the literature on environment will show you that there is a rebound effect. So just to be very clear, rebound is not a behavioral effect. It's a purely economic effect. When I reduce the price of you consuming the water, I get a wealth effect. I earn more money because I spend less money on using water. Because of that wealth effect, I spend more or consume more water. That's the rebound effect. Same thing is happening here. What is happening is I'm reducing essentially water consumption, which means my water pricing is going down. I should use more water because of the rebound. Here you see no rebound effect. That is an important part, that there is no rebound effect, whereas past studies have all documented some kind of rebound effect in these studies. Yes.
Can I ask the general economic implications of the fiscal cost of this? Do you know what's about that?
Yes, it's in the paper.
Okay.
So all these studies I'm presenting are full-fledged papers. I'm spending 2 slides per paper. This was published in Nature Human Behavior. You can read it. The earlier water paper was in Nature Water. Both these studies are very detailed. Each is like 60, 70 pages. I devoted 2 slides just to get you a glimpse of it. But you're right, there is a general equilibrium effect of this policy. Who's bearing the cost of this, because it's a very expensive program.
Other experiments you talk about, there was no external wealthy kind of problems because having 1 iPad, 2 iPad, there is no cost.
True. So even there, we talk about the generalizability of these kind of projects. So every paper I'm presenting few slides, but you can read, and we devote a lot of time talking about the generalizability and general equilibrium effects of these policies. So here are the results, 3.5% on average per apartment within a building. These are huge effects in my sense that we can get this kind of response. Let me not present, there are lots of things we have done on haze, on environment. Let me not talk about it. Let me talk about sea level rise, and then I will talk about social sustainability, because I think that's understudied in the world. Okay. Now, sea level rise is a serious threat for most countries. I think according to the UN, it will affect close to 1 billion people in the world. Countries have been studying this and trying to understand what is the implication of sea level rise. When we think about sea level rise, we say, oh, this will not affect me. So I want to show this will have direct effect on your family, on your wealth, essentially. We wanted to see if there is a sea level rise threat to Singapore, what is the impact of the house prices? Okay. Singapore government, what they did in 2019, the Prime Minister announced that they're going to spend $100 billion in 100 years to combat sea level rise. Okay. So we want to exploit this policy, this announcement of this policy, and show what do people do in terms of their house prices. There's a long literature already that shows that sea level rise itself will have a negative effect on house prices. The estimates go anywhere from 3.5% to 7.5% reduction in house prices. The problem with that literature is there is no identification. It's mostly endogenous. People choose to live near the ocean. Maybe they are rich. They don't mind house prices to go down or be lower for them because they had no intention to reselling it. You can come up with various reasons. I'm not going to waste time here, but I'm going to take that literature at face value and believe that there is a 7% reduction in house prices. So it's uninteresting to me that sea level rise will reduce house prices. What is interesting to me is, can we come up with policies that can undo this effect of price reduction. Can governments intervene? And this is a problem in Jakarta, in Japan, in Korea, where sea level rise is a serious threat. So when the government announced, the prime minister actually laid out very detailed maps of which areas of Singapore will be affected by sea level rise and which areas they're going to actually build a wall. So it's more complicated. I can talk more about it, that the prime minister, this is how far they were thinking. They were thinking about building a wall. The wall itself cost around $10 billion. So it's not a costly effort to build a wall. But what they want to use the other $90 billion is to build a sinkhole in the ocean. So that, because if you build a wall too high, it's very unattractive, okay? It destroys the entire view. If you build the wall too low, it's ineffective. So what you want to do is build a wall right at the right level, but that can be breached every now and then because of water climbing through it. But when the water climbs through it, what you want to do is create a suction pump somewhere in the ocean that sucks up the water and doesn't come to land. So what they are spending the $90 billion in Singapore is to build a little dam in the ocean in that area. So when the breach happens, they open the flood, the water goes in, it becomes like a dam, it generates electricity and saves the land from flooding. So it is very technologically very advanced, but the question is, how do consumers react to it? First, we document that prices go down by around 6%. Again, as I said, this is uninteresting to me, not that informative, we already know it. Then what I did is a difference in difference estimate of the places where they're going to build the wall, essentially, versus where they told there'll be a sea level rise, but we are not going to be essentially building a wall because they can't build a wall everywhere. That depends on the geology and the engineering aspects of the wall. What you see is the buildings that will be protected by the wall, there the effect on house prices is not only 2% or reduced by 2/3. So the strategies of governments to protect the public are more important than just telling us we actually have a threat, sea level rise or any other threat to our environment. If the governments actually invest, we can then help people save financially their wealth. So that's the whole point of this study, that there's huge effects of actually these announcements itself on property prices. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess these are very site specific in terms of thinking about a place like Singapore, where maybe the government announcements carry a lot of credibility compared to weak institutionalized settings where the government might say, I'm going to invest 300 billion in the next 20 years or 100 years or whatever it might be. But the consumer or the citizen, on the other hand, feels, yeah, I mean, I've heard enough of these announcements. So that external validity comes down to very strongly how much trust people have in governance quality in some sense, right? And we're really talking about, at least from what little we know, or I know, that it's a very strong institutional setting in terms of thinking about effectiveness of government's announcements rather than actual implementation.
I mean, I would disagree a little bit. Who has seen 100 years? Okay. I mean, Singaporeans must be so gullible if they really believe 100 years that the government will protect them on this. But on the flip side, another person did a very similar study for Jakarta, and he found very similar effects in Jakarta. When Jakarta announced they will move the capital to Kalimantan, and essentially also how they will build a wall, and their wall is going to cost them $6 billion to build the wall in Jakarta, and what is happening to house prices. So I think people do take these things seriously, because the governments, when they're announcing, they actually have to start implementing these policies. They can't just announce and then they disappear. Then they lose credibility. No future decisions they can make people to take. I mean, and governments are in the business of getting votes from the people. They want to protect them. So I see the argument of the cynicism you have of governments. I have a very healthy cynicism, but I do believe that the governments in these aspects will work for the voters because they do want to be elected again. I'll not talk about environmental anymore. I have a bunch of studies, but let me skip those. Let me spend a few minutes talk about social sustainability, because to me, this is also a very important topic. Now, people talk about social sustainability. I think of that into two groups: social equity and social sustainability of the community. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about both these topics. I mean, let me talk about, you were talking about minimum wages and those kind of studies. I've looked at what is the effect of minimum wages and employers and employees, what happens to wages, what happens to employer. So what we did is we collected this entire data set of hotels in America. So we went out, we know every hotel in America, where they are, what is their wages, how many employees they have, how much revenue they collect every month from customers. And we wanted to see when there's minimum wage change policies in the US, what happens to these hotel revenues and what is happening to the substitutability and which hotels are actually cutting down on wages. So what we do, this is just a debate on minimum wages. There is a hot debate on this topic. I'll just skip it and tell you that we wanted to study what is the effect on the hospitality industry, what is the heterogeneous effect by segment, organizational form. And the key things that we find using this data from 2000 to 2008 on around 200,000 hotels. And we have this revenue per available room, price per night, and occupancy rate. I'll show you that the price went down for these hotels in these segments. What else? Had a negative effect on the revenue, which is expected. You increase the minimum wage, it will actually reduce the revenue per room that they're renting out, and it will actually have heterogeneous effect on these revenue collections by hotels. In a nutshell, what we find is that the luxury hotels, those are the ones who are really going out and cutting these things, whereas the mid-tier hotels are not doing it. And luxury hotels are really more sensitive to these price increases, mostly because they cater to hiring low-wage workers. Okay. We have lots of other findings. I'll skip them. There's another project I'm doing on looking at birth rates, teen birth rates because of hotel policies. I'll not talk about it. Let me talk about this other project that I've been doing, which I think is very important. Now, if I ask most of you, why do you think girls don't go to school? Okay, many of you will tell me cultural reasons, political reasons, many reasons. I'll tell you the two main reasons girls don't go to school. Girls don't go to school because of sanitary pads and toilets. Schools don't have toilets. Girls need privacy. And if girls don't get sanitary pads, the boys will tease them for those 4 or 5 days, and then girls realize, I'm not going to go to school. They stay at home every month, 4 days. What happens is their grades start to fall. When their grades start to fall, the father says, you must not be that smart relative to my boy. I will take you out of school. Then this becomes a stereotype that girls are not as good and the boys are better. And so we don't want to send our girls to school. Truly, it is these things that matter a lot. So we wanted to see, do sanitary pads matter in girls' educational outcomes? Now you might say, look, you're telling me about some villages in India, but this is not a problem for Malaysia. Or this is not a problem for developed countries like America or Europe. In fact, California passed a law that says they will provide free sanitary products for all girls in California. London just passed a law that said they will provide all sanitary products for girls in UK. Okay, so this is a problem worldwide that we need to solve. And this is a financial burden for lots of families, and that's why they don't provide sanitary products to girls. There are lots of macro statistics that talks about how much this will cost in terms of education, in terms of girls who are missing out in school. What we did is we worked with the Indian government in the state of Kerala, where we installed these, we call them as vending machines, sanitary pad vending machines across schools. Now these sanitary pad vending machines, they are essentially, a girl can go and get free sanitary pads from these vending machines. The school registers the name of the girl, which day she took the sanitary pads, how many sanitary pads per day she took, and records everything. I want to see what is the effect of this on their educational attainment, their ability to stay in school, and their grades. Now, this can also be done through sanitary cups. You can buy sanitary cups, but sanitary cups will not have the same effect as sanitary pads, because a cup, once a girl takes it, she can take it home, she can reuse it for 10 years, she doesn't need to bring it back. that will not affect her ability to come back to school. So we want to see what will happen to sanitary pads only. This is the distribution of how sanitary pads are. You sound confused.
Yeah, why doesn't the cup have an effect on schooling?
It will not, because a cup is a reusable product. A girl can take it home, wash it, reuse it next day. She doesn't need to come back to school to get it again. But she has to come back to school. That's why I want to see, do you come
But
back?
in this story, she's not skipping school because of the stigma, but because she needs the pad.
Exactly.
She goes to school.
Exactly. The stigma is a separate story. Here, the fact you need it, you have to come back to school.
But, okay, yeah, I see that point, but that kind of goes against how you set up the whole topic, right? Because you said the girl, because here now, it seems that the girls, if they did not have to, their only motivation to now come to school somehow in the last way you set it up suggests is to get the sanitary pad. But if I roll it back 2 slides, I thought it was the other way around, that they can't come to school because they don't have access to sanitary products. So you might think that providing one which is reusable makes it very easy.
It doesn't work. People have done these experiments in Nepal, and they gave up sanitary cups. And
so one reason we did this in Burkina Faso, we just did a pilot to try and understand, but there were much more concerns about how to be used, what kind of body invasion it is, how it is looked upon in society, rather than to do with this kind of incentive that, oh, I have it, so now I don't need to come back to school. But the real usability of it, that lots of people felt very uncomfortable about using something of the sort of a sanitary cup. But yeah.
I mean, there are medical issues with sanitary cups. I'm not going to get into that, but we wanted to test a simple idea. Do the fact that you have to come and get it, does that increase enrollment in school or reduce dropout rate of girls? Okay. So we rolled this out over 5-6 years. First 50 schools got these sanitary pad vending machines, that 100 schools and 200 schools over various years. That allows us to do a difference and test this in a very clean way. This is the distribution of within the state of Kerala, which schools got it at which time period. So you can see the distribution is across the state. There is no kind of concern. The data is all publicly available. So any one of you can actually go and get this data and redo this study. It's very simple. Actually, the data is called DICE. It's publicly available from the Indian government that has all the enrollment data for every school in India. And then we got this data on the vending machines in which schools they were actually installed. And then we just matched the two and we did the study. Here is the true effect. If you look at grade 7, which is column 3, what you find is the dropout rate goes down by 24%. There is no effect in grade 5 and 6 because the medical science literature says that girls get their period in grade 7, not earlier than that. There is some literature in medical science that says it depends on your protein diet. You can get it in grade 6. We actually test that because the higher protein diet happens for girls who are living in urban areas or richer girls. So we test that data using urban versus rural schools. You get some effect for urban schools because in grade 6, they eat a more protein-rich diet, they can get their period earlier. But the effect is 24%. Typically in economics and finance, you get effects of 2% and 3%, and we jump up and down, and we say to Journal of Finance, please publish it. 24% is a massive effect to show that this works in reducing dropout rates. There is a subsequent effect in grade 8, 9, 10, but those effects diminish, which is expected. Okay. If I plot this thing in a dynamic sense, you see this effect kind of last for 4 or 5 years in grade 7. So all the girls who are coming subsequently to the school in grade 7, they also have this effect in reducing their dropout rate. In fact, it only goes up, not goes down. Okay. Then next thing I looked at is what happens to the examination outcomes. Okay, here I'm going to plot 3 things. Are they more likely to appear for an exam? The girls who are having access to a vending machine in their school, are they more likely to pass the exam? And they're more likely to pass the exam with distinction. You can see the effect is there in all 3 categories for girls. I can redo this with grade 4, where I should not see an effect, and you actually see there is no effect on grades and passing and distinction on the girls. All the effect loads up on grade 7. So the point of this whole study is that there is real effect of sanitary pads. I'm doing a lot of work on education in India, looking at if we have good role models for girls, especially women role models. As administrator, what happens to girls' education? We are looking at other things where we actually require mandatory teachers to have educational outcomes, like requiring a B.Ed degree, Bachelor's of Education degree, for teachers to teach in grade schools. What is the effect on girls' educational outcomes? You see massive effects on how girls behave. Just wanted to make sure. How many minutes do I have?
You still have 34 minutes.
34 minutes. So I have a lot of time. Go ahead.
We're gonna finish 12:20.
Okay.
It was in the email.
Yeah.
Because the one that I watched on YouTube, it was like 2 hours.
So if then I can.
Yes, you have a lot of time. I was thinking 10 minutes,
I was also thinking.
but I have a lot of time, so please ask questions. I take 9 hours to present this.
Yeah. So just again, small clarification, like why did you say that we should not expect effects in when girls are 14 to 15, 15 to 16, they're still having they're menstruating, why wouldn't that be?
So the idea here is, the idea we are testing is that the girls are coming from poorer families, they don't have the sanitary pad, so they don't go to school. But the girl who actually has access to it, she has already gone to school in a grade 7 and 8. So for them, we should not see an effect. The effect will be there, but muted. We will not see this 24% effect. I agree, they are still having menstruation in grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, but they are already coming from families and they have access to sanitary.
Selection has already happened there.
So hence, the biggest effect has to be in grade 7. We will see an effect in grade 8, grade 9, which the results show that there is an effect of 7 to 8%, which is expected. So that's the point. Clearly, I'm not saying periods stop at grade 7.
But why did they choose Kerala instead of the poor states? You know, the education wise or the political wise, the Kerala is a bit.
Kerala is also a state that is willing to actually do experiments and learn from experiments. I'm agnostic. There is no selection in that sense that you may be thinking that why Kerala, and if I replicate this elsewhere, this will not.
Maybe for Bihar, for example.
It will work bigger.
Yeah,
the effects will be bigger in Bihar.
Big,
Yes.
there was-
So I'm saying, look, Kerala is educated already, and I'm still seeing a 24% effect. If I replicate this in Bihar, I will say a 60% effect.
Yeah, that's what
Clearly, okay. So I'm not worried about external validity of it. I clearly think this will have huge external validity if I replicate this everywhere else.
Sure.
Yeah.
So do you know if the students are more likely to attend on days where they actually need sanitary pads? So just on the school days where, because like they have to go to the vending machine and take them.
Yes, that's the whole point, that my beginning argument was that those girls drop out of school on those days. Okay, and then in a year, their grades keep falling behind, and that's when the parents say, I'm going to take you out. So the whole point is that they go to school on those days. I'm not worried about not going to school on any other day. You see my point? So it's tautological that those girls are going more on those days. Okay, so hence the dropout rate, the aggregate dropout rate in the year for them goes down. Because if they were not going, then they will be losing grades and they will be falling behind. Yeah.
I think there may be, I don't know about India, but I know it's a more affected area in Sri Lanka, particularly when there are girls who doesn't have even undergarments to go to school. So I think I live in Australia, so diaspora from Sri Lanka, we get together and then we are providing scheme-wise to those selected school, providing it. That may be again another important study. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, the literature has said that, look, toilets and sanitary pads are the biggest factors. And these are understudied. I mean, look, when we think about sustainability, especially household sustainability, social sustainability is completely ignored. And this issue, a very simple solution, where governments spend millions of dollars buying, guns and stuff to protect themselves. If they just take care of this, the girls can go to school and compete. We know already from most of the literature, girls work harder, they are smarter than boys, and we are losing a lot of this talent. purely because we can't provide them sanitary products or we can't provide them toilets. And this is a worldwide issue, not just an issue in Africa or developing countries. So I think this is the perspective I want to keep of this problem, that we have a lot of things we can easily solve around the world, but we choose not to because we focus on other ideas. The other things I think about from a social point of view, we know lately we have been becoming much more cognizant of this idea of farm to table using QR codes. We want to know where my food was actually produced and how am I consuming it. And this is becoming relevant because we know this QR codes actually matter. I've been studying a lot of this in China, trying to study, do ESG reportings of companies matter, and do consumers pay attention to these ESG ratings, and do they change their consumption behavior? So what I'm looking at is ESG ratings of the company, then I'm going back to the credit card, debit card data of those consumers, looking at that data and looking at which companies, because I actually have the merchant category code within the transaction of your credit card spending. So I know where you buy your food, which merchant category code specifically, then I can track that to the company where that merchant category code comes from. And I know if that company actually had a change in their ESG ratings. So if I can look at the ESG ratings, I can then come back to your merchant category code data from credit card, debit card. And if I see spending variation in your credit card, debit card because of those ESG ratings, I can say, look, consumers pay a lot of attention to these ESG ratings. I've been doing this study for China, where we look at massive data, massive credit card, debit card data. I've also been doing this for the rest of the world, actually working with you guys at the World Bank. In DC, I collaborate from the research team with Leora and some other people, and actually look at these effects. Again, we are collaborating with MasterCard and taking the entire MasterCard data for the world and trying to do this kind of study. And we want to show, does ESG ratings actually matter in your decision to consume? Here, I'm looking at a different question where I'm looking at, do consumers pay attention to the penalties that companies face? If you're more likely to know that the company from which you buy your products, that they are actually more likely to misbehave or being penalized for bad behavior, do you stop consuming from them? If I ask in this room, do you guys care about that? And most of you will say, most likely not. I don't pay attention to this. It's not salient in my mind that, okay, this company was actually having bad labor practices, and that's because of that, I stopped buying products for that. So in China, actually, what happened is, especially in 1996, there was a law that passed that all companies have to report all the penalties that they're enduring and make it public so that the consumers know what penalties they're facing. So essentially what happens is there are 5 kinds of penalties that we track in the data: quality-related penalties, illegal operations, false advertising, tax evasion, and safety-related penalties. So what we did is we looked at company by company, which company faced what kind of penalty, they matched it to the merchant category code of the credit card data, and then see how do consumers respond or change behavior because of these penalties. What you see is the companies that are treated or essentially negatively treated in that case, that actually had a penalty, their consumption drops from around 240 RMB to around 110 RMB, okay, before and after the penalty. So consumers can actually hold companies accountable, and they do hold companies accountable. Again, I want to keep this in perspective. From our point of view, what are we trying to achieve? Socially, we want to make sure companies respond from their environmental change or from their social policy changes, and we can keep them accountable. If they're actually having bad labor practices, can we make sure that they pay for it? Whereas if you look at the second graph, companies that are not actually behaving badly or having penalties, you don't see any change in the consumption behavior of the people who buy from there. So this is using purely transaction level data from this company. Here is a regression that will essentially show you the same results. I can show a dynamic graph of that regression. You can essentially see pre-treatment and post-treatment, the consumption will drop. So I can show you the raw data, I can show you a simple regression, and I can show you a dynamic regression, all confirming essentially the same point.
So the MasterCard or the credit Visa card, they provide all those information.
Luckily, academics have been able to get it.
I didn't know that, they will be providing these information.
I have been working with them for 25 years. This is what I do for a living. So I make relationship with banks, with Visa, MasterCard, getting their data to study, because you can't do this kind of things unless you have very micro data.
So they may be giving an identifier as a number instead of any other details, right?
They are willing to give most of the data that they have. So from banks in Singapore, I have data. From the US, I have data. Turkey, India, China, most countries, I have very detailed credit card, debit card, banking data with all the demographics and the data.
What about Malaysia?
Malaysia, I hope you guys give me. I will be happy to.
I would doubt it. But I mean, the credit card company doesn't have anyway, the government's not regulating.
So Malaysia, I have a bunch of data. We just don't have the time to work on this, on the data from Malaysia. We have a lot of housing data. First, I don't understand it very well, so I have not yet started projects on it. Eventually, we will get to it. We need a Malaysian co-author. We have a student who is Malaysian, so she will work on it, because the names and stuff is very difficult for me to process and figure out. Okay. Let me skip this and talk about financial. As I said, it takes me 9 hours to present this, so I spend a lot of time talking about it. So households make many financial decisions and many financial mistakes. This has been well documented. I've been working on household financial decision making for close to 22 years now. This is where I started my career, and I've added the social and environmental in the last 5 years, but I've spent most of my life doing this. So here I'm going to present a series of papers, which are maybe a slide or maybe 2 slides on each paper, where we're going to show you how mistakes work and how mistakes we make. This is the first thing we did in the US, where we actually went and talked to a bank, and we did a very simple experiment where we gave consumers 2 different credit cards. We gave consumers 1 credit card where we said you can pay 12% interest with a $20 fee, or a second credit card we said you can pay 15% interest and no fee. If I ask you guys, you will say, oh, this is a fairly simple choice. Most of you are from a university, Monash, Central Bank, World Bank. I mean, if you get this wrong, I'll be very worried. More than that, I gave those consumers a simple choice that even if you get this question wrong, you can switch your choice. You can switch the credit card. If you chose card A, you can choose to card B easily. So the optimal choice is straightforward. If the consumers are expecting to borrow, they should choose card 1. If they're not expecting to borrow, they should choose card 2. Straightforward, sounds straightforward. Now you would expect most of the consumers will get this right. What you see in the data, around 40% of them get this very simple question or choice wrong. This is not in the lab. This is with a card company we worked with, and we gave out actual credit cards, and we observed their behavior for 2 years after that. So we did this experiment with 150,000 people, and we were following these people for 2 years after we gave them credit cards by their actual spending behavior. Now you may still argue, well, how can you say, Sumit, this is wrong? Ex ante, I didn't expect to borrow. Ex post, I got negative shocks. I ended up borrowing. So why would you call this a mistake? But I already told you, I gave them this choice to switch their credit cards. So even if they made a mistake initially, they should fix that mistake ex post. So what you see, only 4% of them switch. Okay? So even the ex post argument doesn't work. Out of 40%, only 4% switch. So around 90% of the people who make the mistake never actually fix that mistake. Then you may argue that, look, the maximum penalty or cost of this is $20 for some of those consumers, because they're just paying this $20 extra. That's the true cost for some of those consumers. Fair enough. Economic models will say we are rational agents, okay? And we know that mistakes are correlated. When you make one mistake, you will make many other financial mistakes, which is well documented. I mean, I've written papers on that showing mistakes are correlated. So here I just wanted to show people make mistakes. Okay. The question then is, fine, we make mistakes, but do we learn from our mistakes? So here is a second paper where we actually look at what do consumers do over time with their mistakes. So here we are talking about consumers pay on average around $150 in fees to your bank cards. If you have a credit card with a bank, you will pay late fee, over limit fee, cash advance fee, foreign transaction fees, bunch of fees in a year. On average, a consumer pays around $150 in these fees in the first year of this relationship. I just learned this the hard way. The other day, I was talking to my banker and was trying to get a card for my wife, and I said, I want a no-fee card. And they said, how can we give it to you? Because you yourself pay a fee on your card. And like, I've been teaching this for 20 years for consumers not to do this, and how can I be paying this fee? So I said, okay, show me the paperwork where I signed that I'm going to pay a fee. They said, oh, it's 8 years old, we can't find it. I said, obviously, then I'm not going to pay any fee, and you have to reimburse me all my past fee. They kept looking for it, and I said, look, I'm going to call your CEO. I'm going to go after your bank if you don't pay the money back. And you know how much they were charging me? $300 per year in annual fee for my credit card. Eventually, they paid all my fees back for the last 8 years. And then I said, for my wife's card, I don't want any fees. They said, but all our cards are with fee. I said, I want your business, otherwise I'll leave you, or you give me this fee without fee. They eventually agreed. They gave her a credit card without a fee. Consumers don't fight back with banks hard enough to get all the financial products that they can at the price that we should get it at. So here I'm showing you that on average, we pay around $150 fee, but in 5 years, we learn to deal with the banks. We learn to reduce our fee, and our fee goes down to $50 or by 2/3 over a 5-year period. Now we have a model that in the paper that kind of explains that. This is learning by doing. We make mistakes, we learn from them, we make less mistakes. In our real life, we do the same thing. We will park our car somewhere on a meter. We'll not feed the meter. We'll get a ticket. Next month, we'll keep feeding the meter. In 6 months, we'll forget it. We'll say, oh, the memory recedes. We'll not feed the meter. We'll get penalized again, and we'll make the mistake and learn from it again. You can think of a very simple model like that can rationalize this kind of learning and forgetting kind of a behavior. The next thing we wanted to study is who makes these mistakes. So people make mistakes. We learn from mistakes, but who makes this mistake? Here you actually see that actually young and old people are more likely to make mistakes. We did a study over 10 different products, and we find that the minimum mistakes you make is at age 53. I'm very happy about that number because I turned 53. So I'm happy that I'm making the least amount of financial mistakes, at least for this year. Okay. So consumers make lots of financial mistakes. We did this over 10 different products, and we found the average to be around age 53.
And this is and you interpret this as being a person who's making more mistakes because of their age, or is it also because of the other side who's selling you these services also has very targeted products, which realize, people who are very young or old are much more easier to kind of convince with shady products in some sense.
No referee would have let us go without addressing these comments. So clearly, this is all about consumer mistakes. The paper is very detailed. This paper is especially long. It's around 100 pages. You can look at it, and we go through meticulously, eliminating, discrimination, selection, banks' behavior, all of that to eliminate it. I'll actually spend more slides to show you how this actually works to eliminate the bank's role in these mistakes. Okay. The point is that consumers, old and young, are more likely to make mistakes. Let me tell you why. Okay. Why am I saying this, which is orthogonal to what banks might cause them to make mistakes? The idea we have is very simple, that our cognitive abilities start declining from age 20. So most of us in this room, we have already peaked long time ago. Okay? So at age 20, you have the highest cognitive skills, and they linearly decline from age 20 till you die. Okay? And by the time you are 50, your cognitive skills are less than the mean. But our experiential capital goes up with age. So the point is that analytical capital is declining, experiential capital is gaining. At some point, they will intersect, and you will make the most optimal financial decisions, okay? Where you have the maximum analytical capital and experiential capital. That's what we were exploiting. So the idea here then is that, look, cognition matters. If you have higher cognitive abilities, you will make less mistakes. So then that brings me to my next paper, where we wanted to see specifically nail down on your cognition. How can I show cognition actually matters, and how does that play a role? So what we looked at is a very specific kind of mistake. So this will address your point. We're going to look at a very specific mistake. Now, hang on with me, guys, for a minute. I'll tell you a story of this, how this mistake works. I bet if you have not done balance transfers, you will not know about it. But if you have done balance transfers, you've already made this mistake. So think about, you have $10,000 debt on a credit card. Let's call it credit card A. Credit card B comes around and tells you that if you move your debt of $10,000 to credit card B, you will not pay interest on that for 1 year. For 1 year, there'll be a 0% interest on that $10,000 debt. Next month, you want to go spend it. You want to go buy things. Let's say you buy some things for $1,000. You buy things for $1,000, but at the end of the month, you pay off that $1,000. Okay? Now, if you use your credit card B to buy that $1,000 products, the new purchases, you already have $10,000 debt on that credit card B. If you go out and buy $1,000 credit card purchases on that and pay it off, that $1,000, what will happen? Does anybody know? What will happen is they will use that $1,000 to pay off the $10,000 debt. So your debt will become $9,000, and then you will have a new debt of $1,000. So the $9,000 debt will be at 0%, and the new $1,000 debt will be at 24%. That's how credit cards work. Let me point this out. What happens is they have this fine print in the credit card application that we apply your payment to balance with lowest APR. So when you make a payment, it will be applied to your lowest APR balance. Very simple. We all should know it. We all, when we are making financial transactions, we should know how these things work.
So in this case, you need to compare the credit card interest rate between those two. If the interest rate are same, then it doesn't matter.
Why?
Because card one, I have a balance 10,000, I am paying interest.
No, I moved it to card two.
No, but if I keep the balance in card one, then I will be still paying interest on that one.
Yeah.
So let's say 10% a year.
Let's say 24%.
Yeah, okay, 24% a year. And then I move to the card two, and then still I'm going to pay 24%.
No, 0%. My example is when you move that balance to card two, you'll pay 0% for 1 year.
Yeah, still I benefit. Why? Because I'm not going to pay any interest for a year on that $10,000. Okay, I spent $1,000, so I'm going to pay only for $1,000, that $1,000. But if I stay with the earlier card, I will be paying for the $11,000.
But I am giving you a better strategy. What should you guys do in this situation? You should use your card A to make your new purchases. Because at the end of the month, you will pay off that $1,000. You have that card A anyway. You moved your $10,000 to card B from card A. So make all your new purchases on card A, pay it off, which means you will pay down that $10,000 and you will incur no new interest. Make sense?
Yeah, but I still don't get it, because if I have $10,000, I still need to pay an interest in my earlier card.
No, I moved it to card B. I'm going to pay zero.
Got it now. Yeah, thank you. got it. Yeah, of course. You need to keep the both.
Look, even finance professors can't get it. Imagine what the layman on the street is doing. Okay. HOD of finance department has hard time.
No, I think the idea is to keep both cards.
Both cards.
You have both cards.
Yeah, but I didn't get.
Nobody took away anything of those cards. You have both cards. Everything is there. You should use card A to make purchases. I call this idea, you get your eureka moment, that I should use card A. Smart people will know it right away. Card A is what I should use to make purchases. If you're not very smart, you will learn it over time. The first month you pay that interest on your card B on the new purchases, you will get it and you should switch to card A. So eventually you should all switch to card A. So this is the idea I want to test. So what I want to do is, this is how the game is played. The bank has no role. It's all about, you're going to make this mistake on your own. The question is, who makes this mistake more likely? Is it people who are smart versus people who are not so smart? So what I did is then I matched this data that I have on your balance transfer mistakes to the AFQT scores of all military personnel in America. So I have their AFQT score, which is every military personnel has to take this cognitive test when they join the military. This cognitive test is very complicated. It's of 10 different products. They do a logic test, math test, arithmetic test. They do English test. So many different things. In the paper, we document this very well. And we wanted to see if this tests, people who have higher test scores actually make less mistakes. So to be very precise, we are not doing any fuzzy matching. We actually know the social security numbers of the people who took the AFQT score, and we know the social security numbers of the people who have this credit cards with this bank and did the balance transfer mistake. So it's a very precise match that we have, and we look at around 1,200 people in this data. And the idea is, do you get the eureka moment, which is that I should use card A to make all my purchases? What you find is on the x-axis, I'm plotting the AFQT score, which is a cognitive score of the people. And on the y-axis, I'm trying to understand who is more likely to make this mistake or get the eureka moment. Higher the AFQT score, the less likely, or actually zero probability that you will make the mistake. Okay? Everybody gets the eureka moment right away that I should not use card B to make purchase. The lower the AFQT score, you're much more likely. Actually, if your score is between 30 to 60, you are more likely to make a mistake than not likely to make a mistake. This is how card companies make money. 50% of all their revenue of a bank comes from the credit card business. Of the 50% of the revenue of the bank that comes from credit card business comes from fees. So 25% of all revenue for banks comes from credit card fees and payments. Other comes from interest rates. So you can imagine how much money they make purely because we don't understand what these card companies do. They're not hiding anything. It's there. We should have read it and we should have used it. Even if we didn't read it, the first month you make this mistake, you will be shocked and you will learn from it and you should switch. The fact is, if your FQT score is low, you never learn from these mistakes. You constantly continue to use credit card B to make your purchases. Yeah. I mean, I've looked at mortgage refinancing. This is a topic that has been very close to me for years. I've written maybe 4 papers on mortgage refinancing over the years, trying to understand who makes mortgage refinancing decisions. Now, if you actually ask people, there is a whole industry devoted to, mortgage refinancing. There are all these mortgage refinancing calculators, advisors, books written. I have also written books on this topic, trying to understand optimal financial decision-making of consumers or giving advice to consumers. Optimal refinancing should happen at an interest rate differential of 2%. When current interest rates are 2% below from your mortgage interest rate, you should go out and refinance. Most people will refinance when interest rate drop by 40%, 40 basis point. 40 basis point interest rate fell, you go refinance. That is suboptimal. You're leaving a lot of money on the table. There is another big fraction of the people who never refinance the mortgage. Even when interest rates drop by 3% or 4%, they're still holding on to their original mortgage. And they're leaving a lot of money on the table as well. Some of them are ignorant. Some people just don't understand finance. They should talk to advisors. We actually built a financial calculator or a mortgage refinancing calculator, and it was a big hit. Many people actually used it every month in the US. I think the calculator is still there. I've not kept track of it. But the point is that most of our consumers will make mortgage refinancing mistake. Now, when you make a 40 basis refinancing mistake, what you're giving up is the option to refinance again. When interest rates fall again, you will not be able to refinance. And you see that in the data that a lot of these consumers will not refinance. That's the second time. Let me talk about something else, which is peer effects and consumption. We know peer effects are there in everything we do. I mean, we know our children are affected by people who smoke in school. Their sexual habits are determined by their peers in their schools. That's why we spend a lot of time on sex education in high schools and stuff. Drug addiction, a lot of that comes from peer effects. That is interesting because that's for social scientists. As finance guys, I worry about, are there peer effects in consumption? Do our peers determine our consumption? Our economic models actually have no room for that, unless we think behaviorally that peer effects should not determine my consumption. My consumption should be determined by my income, precisely. If we think about any model, Friedman's model or Keynesian model, any model that will be talking about that. So the question is, do peers affect your consumption decision? Now that's a very tough question. Now people who work in econometrics and who work in identification, they will talk about the reflection problem in solving this kind of issue. They will talk about the data issues that are required in solving this problem. So what we did is we said, let's look at this problem in the context of Singapore, where we have very precise buildings and we know the consumption behavior of everybody within the building and the next building. And then we said, let's shock somebody in a building. We give them a shock within a building and then see what happens to the consumption of the peers, and then see what happens to the consumption of the peers in the next building or 5 buildings away. So the way we shock the people is looked at bankruptcy. Now, bankruptcy is a very dramatic event for an individual. In most countries, when you declare bankruptcy, your records are public. They show up in the newspaper. Even in Singapore, as soon as you declare bankruptcy, it is a public information. They will say this person by name in this building declared bankruptcy. And that has huge consequences. You cannot take a taxi. You cannot own a smartphone. You cannot do many things. This is Singapore specific, but there are consequences in most countries, because most countries don't have Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They only have Chapter 13, which is creditor friendly, not debtor friendly. So you can see what is the implication when you actually have a bankruptcy event on the consumption behavior of the neighbors. So we actually looked at their credit card, debit card, banking transactions and see how much consumption goes down. A traditional model should have no implication on it. What you actually see that the consumption of the neighbors in that building will drop by, on average, 3.5% for every neighbor in the building. Essentially, this is what the regression is saying. There could be various mechanisms. We document in the paper 4 different mechanisms on why consumption could go down. You could be friends with them. There could be Jones's effect, keeping up with the Jones. I see them buying certain kinds of groceries every day. Now they don't buy those groceries from the high-end stores, so I don't need to buy it. They used to go on vacations. I used to go on vacation with them, but now I don't need to do any of those.
But is it persist for a longer year, or is only, stays memory?
I don't have the graph, but the effect is there at least for 18 months of the data, but it's in the paper, the dynamics of this regression. So these effects are very long time persistent. I'm happy to stop here and take questions. I have many slides. Instead of going through them, I'll just ask you guys if you have questions.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I just want to ask, with regards to some of your work about the water consumption as well as the period pad, the pad, how do you tease out distributional impact of these policies? So, for example, did you find like larger impact in districts where you have higher, poorer students or something like that?
You mean to say the electricity where we were giving them the iPad?
Electricity or even the sanitary pad. Like I remember the 24%. Is the impact larger in districts where you have more poorer students?
Yes. So good question. So in terms of the first point, but what did we do with those things? We actually knew the school. We have these 18 schools that are treated. So we can redo this analysis school by school and building by building, because we know which building the water went down and how much effect was there. And you can see some economic related effects that, people who are poorer will be having a bigger effect in terms of electricity reduction. That could be because they think, we want to take advantage of winning an iPad for kids. But a lot of that is behavioral, especially for kids. I mean, they don't understand their parents' money. I have a 4-year-old son. He doesn't care where my money comes from, or if I'm rich or poor. He just wants his toys or whatever he wants. So in that setting, it's not very clear that economics will play a big role, but we do find some variation, heterogeneity in this. In terms of your sanitary pads, we actually have a lot of data by type of school. We know if it's a private school versus a public school. We know if it's a rural school versus urban school. We know if it's a Christian school versus non-Christian or a Muslim school. Those are designated in India. We know if the school belongs to lower caste kids versus upper caste kids. So we break the data by all of those variations. Since our story is an economic story, which is that, look, this is because the sanitary pads are expensive. That's why parents cannot afford them. That's why the kids actually drop out. You can actually see the effects being larger in public schools, in rural schools, and actually minority schools or people. So you see huge variation in these effects as they translate. Similarly, in the water studies we did, there's just no way I can present all of this in such short time in terms of getting all the heterogeneity or variation. Yes.
So I have a question about the individual scorecards that you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the talk. So one criticism against recycling, consumer recycling in general is that the effect of or the potential impact of consumer recycling is much lower than if firms are changing their behaviors. So the question is, how do you see this individual scorecards can be a catalyst to change firm behaviors?
So we are working with a lot of companies in Singapore, in India, and abroad, where I'm actually in this effort. So building the scorecard is a very tedious job. So I'm working with a Japanese company that is first creating labels for all meat products around the world. So we are going to create labels essentially like a label that you have in food right now. We'll create a carbon label for beef, for pork, for chicken. Every food product will create a label, carbon label. We are also working with a food delivery app company in Singapore, where a lot of this, waste and stuff comes into play, and we are incentivizing consumers to say that, look, if you actually don't buy beef, or if you don't use plastic for delivery, we will give you $1 off in your food delivery, or we'll give you $2 off. Or we appeal to them their environmental consciousness that if you don't do that, you will be saving their environmental footprint by X. And eventually, if you have a scorecard of your own, you will actually improve your scorecard. So I try to link all of this to their scorecard. So we are running a bunch of such experiments that in the center I run at NUS. That's where we do these kind of experiments. Yes. Yeah. Did you have a question back there?
So maybe I can, maybe still, you didn't really cover anything on, I saw you had some slides on pollution and stuff, so maybe I'm.
Yeah, I did cover, I will skip that.
Maybe I'm moving away from what you spoke about, but just to get a general thought that always comes to my mind, and maybe you have some interesting insights on it, So when you think about a setting like India, or for instance, thinking about a place like Delhi, and thinking about goods and air can't get more public than air as far as goods are concerned. So we have known about the extent of air pollution, say in India or in Delhi in particular, well documented for at least the last 12 to 15 years, right? That it became, so we see hardly any kind of state action from whoever kind of concern or party might. There have been, of course, these kinds of things about trying to give some payments to reduce crop burning, which some people now claim.
And I disagree with your premise that the governments are not doing. They're doing a lot. But the problem is the supply and demand. When you reduce, make efforts to reduce supply, there are other things that pop up. But go on with your question. What's the question?
Yeah, so I was just kind of trying to understand, from your work on this area, what kind of results in places like, say, Beijing now and Shanghai becoming, relatively speaking, quite green and livable in terms of air quality, to places like Delhi remaining stuck in an equilibrium of extremely unpalatable air quality to live in. So do you have any kind of insights from your work that's such a phenomenon?
So I think on both fronts, I would disagree with you. Beijing is not green by any measure. Okay, it's highly polluted. Okay, average air quality index in Beijing is still about 100. Okay,
compared with 300 in Delhi.
It's not 300 in Delhi. It depends if you pick the worst part of Delhi on the worst day, yes, 300. Okay, but Delhi is around 160 on average. The issues are very complicated. Delhi moved all the factories out of Delhi. Okay, they did that around 15 years ago. Some people cheated, but they are now on the outskirts, and they will depend on the wind direction on any given day what the AQI index would be for Delhi. Okay. And I've looked at that. We are doing a lot of projects on this. Let me give you a very simple example. So I have data which is publicly available from India. You can collect data on India on every sale of an automobile, two-wheel automobile, three-wheel automobile, four-wheel trucks, everything is publicly available. So we'll collected all this data for the whole country, and we wanted to see when you actually build MRT stations in Delhi and around those MRT stations, what is happening to the sales of automobiles and what is happening to the reduction in pollution using the pollution index. You can actually see a big reduction in automobile purchase first. All automobile purchases go down the consumer's guide because they're using the public transport. Second, you can actually see using the pollution index that pollution is going down. So efforts are there. The question is, how do we get to the efforts that maybe Singapore is making or America has? Then it is about life versus livelihood debate. And the discussion in developing countries is that you guys polluted for 100 years. You never thought about it. Now we are polluting and you're telling us, because we are poorer countries, you're telling us we can't do this. And it's an unfair debate or unfair argument. Now, I don't know what is wrong or right. Should we actually not pollute because it's in the self-interest? And the developing countries' argument is that this is an externality I'm willing to create for developed countries because they created that externality for me for 100 years plus. But they are making effort. Look, what Beijing has done is quite remarkable over the last 20 years. What India is saying is, I'm not willing to do that because my livelihood question is much bigger for me, providing employment for people across India than the environmental question at this point. Eventually, they will have to do this because they will have no choice, because the long-term health consequences of not doing anything is much more devastating than taking action. We have a lot of studies looking in China and how Chinese phones are doing, pollution hiding, and what we call that, they're doing, they're making sure that they pollute in the nights than in the day, because in the nights they can't be caught by the government.
I think we need to leave the room, but we can discuss outside. There is fruit, coffee, and thank you very much.
We have a QR here for the survey feedback. Before I put this video over. Short survey.
So, yes.
So I actually know Bash.
Oh,
So
yeah, one of the papers is the back.
Exactly. I saw his address.
Yes.
He was a professor at
Oh, really? He's a very good friend. We are doing more work with him. So this paper, like I've talked to the IQ, so it's with him. And he's actually going to come to Singapore next year. We have invited him to visit. So I spent 6 years with him at the Fed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's still at the Fed. He's still actively working there. Very smart guy. Very nice guy. Very
What about like engineering?
yes, that's it there. That's it.
Then just
Okay, at the world bank.
no, I was in.
Okay.
I was in DC for like 5 minutes.
Okay. Where were you in the DC which course?
So when you start with the global
I think somebody else thinks. Oh, you can move it in, don't take his time, but
I'm so sorry.
See what?
Yeah. You're leaving it. So she came after the class ended. Yeah, that's what she
No problem. I know that.
If you think to your hobby.
As long as you benefit, that's the point. That it was some studies would appeal to some people.
Before me, doesn't.